Star Tribune was one of the first media outlets to report that Winston Smith had been fatally shot by deputies on a federal task force in Minneapolis last month. In their initial report, Star Tribune wrongfully identified Smith as a murder suspect. When the public found out this information was inaccurate, hundreds of people went online demanding the paper issue an apology. And they did, something we don't see happen too often. Today, I sit down with one of the editors at the paper who shares with us exactly how this misinformation ended up online and what she says they're doing to prevent something like this from happening again.
They want this to remain silent, and they want all the details to be guessed and then falsely reported on by the Star Tribune.
Toussaint Morrison was one of several community leaders who called out the Star Tribune publicly for inaccurately reporting on Winston Smith.
Do you want to be right or do you want to be first? Think about that. Say his name!
Kendall Harkness, assistant managing editor of diversity and community at the paper, says despite an online correction, the damage was already done.
They really didn't understand how fast, like as soon as you put it up, wildfire. At one point, I think probably before George Floyd, I felt more uncomfortable about saying certain things in our newspaper, not necessarily feeling like I had the ability to be my full self.
What changed?
Floyd changed for me. Floyd changed for a lot of people in our newsroom. We were watching not only, we were in the streets witnessing, our city implode. And then watching the reaction of other newsrooms from around the country. And so, we took a moment, because, you were in the fight, in the hunt of making sure we keep people safe and cover things that we were covering. And then there was that sort of lull where we were able to sort of look around and just go, like, what are we doing? Like, we need to, something needs to change here. And, a bunch of us got together, and it was clear that there were several call-outs at bigger newspapers like the LA Times and New York Times and the Washington Post that our paper was not interested necessarily in that happening here. They were watching that and understanding that this is the time that there needs to be listening and less talking. And so, I credit the managing editor, Suki Dardarian, with really just calling me up and saying, what do we need to do? What are, the people of color who work at our paper, what are they feeling? What are they thinking right now? And so I'm like, I'm going to ask. So, we sat around and asked and talked about, I said, they're listening right now. What do they need to hear from us? And so, we gathered together, wrote up a list of solutions to, I think the one thing that we had learned was if they wanted to actually make the change happen, they would have done it already if they knew what they were doing. So we had to give them a roadmap to what change looks like in order for us to move forward in any shape, manner, or form. And a bunch of us got together, wrote down solutions, and then presented those solutions to during the pandemic in a park, because we wanted to be physically present with these people as we told them stories from inside our newsroom of issues that have happened, and sort of point to problems or situations, and then be able to say, this is what's happened to this person. This is a solution for that. And then sort of work through that piece of it. So in those moments, we were very, very candid about what systemic racism looks like, what 155 years of centering whiteness and maleness in our newsroom looks like, and that it's not going to change overnight, but change needs to start now, regardless of what. So yeah, I think George Floyd's murder sparked a lot of things in a lot of places, but definitely for us, it gave us, it was enough, and it was time to do something different than what we had been doing.
Did you all only address newsroom culture, like as a workplace, how it was impacting employees? Did you also discuss the narratives that are published as well?
Yeah, I think that we discussed both of those things, but there was a feeling that we really needed to clean our house and have understanding, like, how can you cover people well when you can't even treat your neighbor well, right? So I think first and foremost, we needed to get better language around how we treat each other and how we create a sense of belonging and how we can hire and retain people of color in our newsroom, and what that actually looks like, and build structure around that. And so I think, that 155 years is real. Like, there are building blocks to change. Like, I am not interested in a Band-Aid of any sort. It doesn't help us. In the 90s, we, as a...
How long have you been there?
I've been there since 2000, so about 20 years, 21 years. But in the 90s, I wasn't here then, but as journalism in the 90s had a wake-up call at one point. They hired, newspapers hired a bunch of different types of people in the newsroom. It was full of us at one point, and economic turn, first last to leave is the first to head out, the last to come in is the first to leave. So the gains that they made in the 90s in terms of people actually in the room by 2000 had gone. And so that changed, and they did some things. There was one editor who actually remembers there being talking about diversity of sources and all that kind of stuff that was in their actual review year in and year out. And all of those things sort of fell through the wayside when contraction happened in their industry. And so right now, so I'm trying to remember the 90s and how that didn't work, to sort of figure out what the roadmap looks like.
Like how we got here.
Right,
yeah.
right. So I'm trying to figure out how do we build it in the structure of what we do in terms of behavior, in terms of policy, in terms of guidelines.
So it doesn't get undone.
Correct.
Again,
right? So we're in the process of trying to figure out what that looks like. Getting people in the door is helpful because then there are ideas around that. But building the structure that can last, building it into the foundation.
And so your position now and your role now, and did that change after George Floyd?
My position did not exist before George Floyd.
So your position was kind of birthed out of this desire for a more diverse and equitable newsroom.
Correct.
And so can you just kind of brief us, give us an overview of what your title is and what responsibilities fall within? What my job actually is still being worked out after it's still 6 months or so. But so I'm the assistant managing editor of diversity and community. And right now what I'm doing, as I build this
build this job and build its foundations. I'm really trying to concentrate on so hiring, retention is big, making sure that we hit diversity in all aspects of it in our newsroom, not just in the content producers, but also in management and leadership positions, the gatekeepers. We need more people who look different and are different in those positions, and they're hard to find. And in the sense that our industry has not done the best job of making people feel like they have voice in those spaces, so they tend to leave, or just making sure that, it's just like not cultivating people who look like us over a longer period of time, so that that top tier, there's just not as many of us who can hit that top tier position. That is coming. I feel like that is changing as I look around the media landscape. It feels like that is finally moving in the right direction. But hiring and retention is very important. Also, and that goes hand in hand with coverage. How, we're trying to be good citizens to each other in the newsroom, but also be good citizens to the state of Minnesota. And what does that look like? And so I'm doing a lot of sort of team building around issues, style book issues. How do we label and talk about people? So there's a team for that. Internships. How do we build pipelines of young journalists to sort of nurture, and then they can stay with us, but nurture for journalism as a whole, right? To be good citizens of journalism by gathering young people and training them as best we can. And then we just started. So there are like 8 different teams of people. We've got a corrections team that just got started. We have a crime committee that just got started. So there are all of these teams that are sort of built to sort of attack different parts of what we do, to sort of reimagine, sort of dismantle and reimagine what that's supposed to be looking like as we look towards the future. But so my hand is in a lot of pots.
Yeah. And it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of work internally.
Yes.
Which I feel like the public's not necessarily privy to.
Right.
They're not seeing all these things that are being examined and cultivated behind the scenes, or measures that are being put in place when you identify something that is problematic or harmful. So how do you address issues when the public doesn't feel like the news outlet is serving it in the best way? Like you said, we have this responsibility.
Yes.
Not just to our neighbors and the people here, but to the state of Minnesota.
Correct.
We have a responsibility to get it right, to be factual, to be diverse, even in the sources.
Right.
And so how you've elaborated a lot on how you guys are addressing the internal.
Yeah.
How is Star Tribune addressing some of the external shortcomings? Part of it is through those teams. So I think that in terms of coverage, with this crime committee that just got started, what we're doing is dismantling, talking to all of the police reporters and having them go through their process, and getting a better understanding of their process. And then once we can get to that place, we can sort of dismantle what those assumptions are in terms of where are the holes in what you're doing? What's the stuff that's good, and what's the stuff that sort of
lends itself to a more one-sided view of things, like, just examining language and labeling. So this group, I think there are about 8 of us on this committee, will be examining, do we use authorities say? Like, by using the word authority, are we giving more weight to somebody that doesn't necessarily deserve that weight? Are we being careful about how we identify people? So if we say, do we want to use ex-con or ex-gang member? What does that mean? What does that connotation mean depending on where in the state that people are reading it? Is it a benefit, or is it something that is a label that doesn't necessarily describe or do the best job in terms of understanding who these people are? Does it need to be at the top? Does it need to be at the bottom? So there's a process in which we're going through where we're taking a look at how we use language and how we label, what the sourcing looks like in terms of either breaking news or crime, or court stuff too, and sort of dismantling all of that, and then coming up with guidelines, because sometimes what happens is you have your regular beat reporters, but then you have people who work on the weekend. They might be from features, they might be from biz, they might be from sports. So there's a rotation that happens. So if there's shooting somewhere or some type of breaking news, they may not know what to do. And they know how to report, but they may not know about the nuances of what covering those types of stories is like. So, they always have an editor there that helps them. But even if they have like a tip sheet or guidelines that really sort of spells out how we want to be as fair and equitable in terms of our language, in terms of making sure that we have different sourcing, different types of voices. Because, if you're covering music, like, and you're the music reporter, you may just, talk to the press release and maybe talk to a couple of other people, but you're not really thinking about necessarily that sort of nuance of what community reporting or weekend reporting could entail.
Right. Well, and these are not issues exclusive to Star Tribune.
No.
This is something that newsrooms across the country are dealing with. This is not exclusive to newspapers. This is broadcast journalism. This is radio journalism. This is across the board. This is something that media entities across this country are battling right now. And so taking yourself outside of your role, outside of your company, what are your thoughts on the impact that media outlets have had on the Black community specifically? Do you think that, historically speaking, the industry has in any way, shape, or form caused harm to the Black community?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about the narrative of the last 400 years, right? There's no question about over time. So when sometimes I get folks who will call and they'll be angry and they'll be yelling and about the Star Tribune has done this, the Star Tribune has done that. And I'm like, the Star Tribune is racist. And I'll say, like, this is, it's a Star Tribune problem, but it's an American problem. And newspapers or journalists or news organizations, if America is centering whiteness, if America is a white supremacist state, then news organizations have been for centuries the megaphone for that, right? So if you're going to have authority sources, and those authority sources are steeped in centering whiteness, centering maleness, then that's what you're going to get. And by lifting those voices up and over communities of color, and perpetuating stereotypes within those. I mean, how can it not do harm?
Yeah.
I mean, it just goes without saying. It is the air in which we breathe. I mean, it just is what is happening. And until we are intentional about dismantling and reversing what's happening, then we can't necessarily move forward as a nation. I just, in so many aspects, I keep on thinking about education, forget the police system, just like education. Every corner of what we do, if it is older than 10 years, older than 2 years, they have work to do. And it's going to take a long time to get to that point, because there is this, America's been eating its Wheaties with the wrong side of the spoon for a very, very long time. Yeah. And to make that turn to the right side of the spoon is going to take a long time. But I think with consistent pressure, I think change is possible. At least, I tend to be hopeful, so. I'm one of those hopeful type of people. I'm like, we're gonna make it happen. So, yeah.
So that's like a granular view, and to kind of go very microscopic. Do you feel like the inaccuracies in the Winston Smith article caused harm to the Black community?
Yeah, I think it's a perpetuation of that type of, it is a perpetuation of that same narrative in where we head to the murder suspect piece, and not take the not step back and really be wary of what that does, but also making sure that we are accurate in that way. So that it can't not in some way, right?
I'm guessing you weren't directly involved with that article.
I was not.
But do you know the details of how that inaccurate information ended up published to the public? Sure.
I think that there was, I'll tell you what I know. I will always sort of doubt my own accuracy in some ways. But there was scanner traffic for sure. I believe that it was published online, and then an editor came back and the reporter came back and like, oh no, don't put it in there. It wasn't necessarily verified. I can't verify it. And so they took it out. But at that point, which is sort of what we've been having a lot of discussion about, at that point, it had already been tweeted. It was already online. It had already been shared. And even though they came back with an update and then a correction, but our correction policy is where you have to, it's at the bottom of the story. And so like all of that stuff had to be re-examined. So it was one of those where, newspapers especially, well, I think news organizations, I really, sometimes I don't believe fully grasp how the social media can, how fast and furious social media can act. Because I think they're thinking, sometimes we think more print-centric than we do in terms of digital-centric, yeah. And I think in this case, it's just like they had corrected it. The paper hadn't come out at that point, so they were able to, by the time the next day in the newspaper, that inaccuracy wasn't in there. So they were like, okay, we took care of it. But they really didn't understand how fast, like as soon as you put it up.
The damage.
Wildfire, right? Wildfire. So yeah, so then, then they figured it out, right? They had to like, okay, like, we didn't, so now we have to figure out like, what's our correction policy for online? Because, we have one, but it wasn't necessarily for social media. Do we take down the post? How does that work? If we take down the post, we have to say something. And so like figuring out, so with the Winston Smith case, like it was serious enough for us, and new in the sense that we had not anticipated, not necessarily what that mistake and how fast that could go and what needs to happen in terms of like repairing the damage of that mistake. And so on the fly, created a new policy about how that happens. If something like this happens again, what do we do? So it took longer than I wanted it to in terms of...
What's the new policy?
If we recognize that there is something that's inaccurate, post comes down immediately and then immediately comes back up. In terms of like not just an update. They said, I think the last time when we sent out the update, it was more, it said update on it. Instead of saying update, it would more say correction. And then taking down the old tweet, but actually I think we're going to try and keep that old tweet as either a screenshot so that people have an understanding of what we're talking about. And depending on what platforms that went to, there would be an additional platform, which is what we kind of did on the fly. We were like, okay, it was on Twitter. And then we're like, oh, but a whole bunch of it was on Facebook. And we're like, oh, we were on Facebook. So we did, the apology on Facebook too. And there are a few of our online folks who now are in the process of writing something concrete that people can use. So they're taking what they learned from, what happened with Winston to get to a better form. Because, unfortunately, with the work that we're doing internally, we're still going to make mistakes. And so how do we address those mistakes when they happen?
Was this the first time in your career that you saw the Star Tribune issue an apology? Has there ever been other instances where that's happened?
I'm trying to think. I think that we might have, but
it's kind of rare.
It is very, very rare. We don't do that.
What led into the decision to say, okay, look, we're going to make this apology about this specific mistake?
I think there is a deeper understanding of the effect that our words have in community. I just think that they, as a whole, at least with the leadership, they're getting that a little bit more. This is the one thing that, we're doing a lot of internal work that, we don't necessarily share it, but I will share this one, is that we've got this community advisory board that's a test pilot right now. And we meet with 8 people from the community once a month. I think we started sort of mid-trial to talk to folks and learn a little bit about how we do things and what they're seeing and what we can learn from them. This is sort of a test pilot to get us to a more permanent board so that community members can have that exact access to us. And there's one woman who was on the community board, which was intentional, that lost a child to police violence. And so it was really, so having her voice the last few months, I think has really helped in understanding what pain looks like in our community. And she says something that actually sticks with me all the time, is that she's like, the police kill my child, and then, the news kills him again, using, killing his character, right?
Yeah.
And so it was good. It was just like, it was good for us and for leadership to hear her voice and hear the pain in her voice about that. And then, so that when, when we talked about Winston Smith in a way that was not accurate, that led to more harm to his family, it was easy for me to remind them of what this mother had said.
And so the correction went out by the book, like, this is how we should correct it.
Right.
At what point was there a decision made that was like, okay, this is not enough? Like, was there something that...
it was so like, it's so funny because, there's a lot of traffic on Twitter and Facebook, but there's also a lot of traffic in, there's a lot of discussion in our newsroom too. So sort of, I always call it like the inside-outside game, is that there are people in our newsroom who are like, oh my God, we got to do something. And there are people outside going, oh my God, you've got to do something. And so I think that over the weekend, there was this sort of crescendo because like people were talking about it in our newsroom, online, and so it was good. It was a sort of swell of voices that there was already, and I was off that week or that weekend, and so I came back and I just sort of like with the managing editor and editor, I'm just like, have you heard what have you guys been thinking about this? And they're just like, yeah, we need to talk. And they had been talking and thinking about it through the weekend about what to do. And, again, like this is sort of newish in a way to sort of like, how do we respond to this? What is the proper response? What is too much, too little? What do we need to do? And so I think that swell really helped as they're trying to sort of solidify what this means. Yeah. I mean, because it's hard, because it's just like all of these actions are super new. Newspapers would just be these lofty places, and people from the left and right complain all the time, and we need to stay neutral. We need to stay, and what they're understanding at this point is that they're understanding what the effect of centering whiteness as a news organization and what that impact is and what that looks like. They don't totally get it. Yeah. But they're starting to see pieces of it.
Well, and I felt like there was like a culmination, and we can get ready to wrap up here, but there was like a culmination of different things that played into that specific article and the layers of damage. Yeah. Just here you have a father of 3, a comedian, post George Floyd, post Dante Wright. Here's the next police killing. Yeah. Simultaneously in North Minneapolis, there's someone responsible for shooting 3 children in the head and killing 2. Yes. So being there on the scene and hearing Black people say, well, maybe the police finally did their job. maybe that's the murder suspect who killed the kids in Minneapolis.
Right.
There's a lot of layers to how damaging that one mistake was. And for me, it was the first time I ever called out a news organization for something. And it wasn't about attacking Star Tribune or attacking the reporters. It was about shining a light on how this industry has historically caused harm. Because it's not the first time that a false accusation was made against a black man, and that also actually helped justify his death. We saw this happen over and over and over again in the 20s and 30s and 40s when black men were lynched. So there's so much there, and I'm just curious to know, like, for you, what is your why? How do you continue to work in an organization that in some ways is responsible for harm to the community? How do you, and even like you said, like, it's not, I'm not just asking you, like your son's asking you, like, wait a minute, like how do you find peace? Like, where is your center in all of this?
How I find peace is that I have never seen this newsroom, or frankly any newsroom, who's doing the amount of listening and the amount of opening up as I've seen. So I feel like there's a window of opportunity. Like, the Star Tribune as a whole reaches the entire state, and their scope is rather large. And if I think that people are in this moment willing to make the change necessary, then I'm going to stick around and help them get to the place that they need to go. And there might be a point at some time where they are not moving or not moving fast enough, and then I would have to reevaluate. But in this moment, right now, the fact that I'm hearing, the top editors in my role, I answer to the editor. So we have dialogue just about every day, every other day. So knowing that I have an opportunity to change the very top of the organization in the way he is thinking and reacting and talking about things, that's powerful. So I'm going to take that opportunity to release as much knowledge as I can, and hopefully, just change that ship. Turn that Titanic around, basically, right? There's some issues in terms of having to deal with. There's always in any organization folks who are not necessarily interested in changing or interested in the status quo. But I feel like if there's a willingness at the top that that structure can be made to alleviate some of the issues that we're talking about.
Is there anything else you want to say? Anything else that you want people to know, or that you want to leave people with?
Let me see. No, I didn't just I'm a super hopeful person. So I'm going to try to do what I can. 155 years is a long time. I just tell people, just like I always say, like, if the Minneapolis police decided that they were gonna, they completely erased, fired everybody, hired new people, held hands, sang Kumbaya. I always said that we would still have a police problem. And because it's all based on structure and not necessarily on the people who are there. So building structure is where it's at in terms of long-lasting change, but it takes so much time. And so I'm committed to taking the time necessary to build the structure. But, I try to tell people to be patient, but nobody's going to be patient. Nobody needs to be patient. Yeah. I always tell people that it's important for us to hear from them too. That letting us know when we get it right and when we get it wrong is important. That feedback helps us who are working in the newsroom point to what needs to change.
Thank you for listening to The Georgia Fort Show. Become a supporter at georgiafort.com.